The snow had been falling for 3 days straight when Rose Fairchild realized she would freeze to death if she did not find more wood for her dying fire. The cabin her late father had built stood isolated on the edge of the Wyoming Territory wilderness, miles from the nearest settlement of Lincoln. It was January 1878, and the blizzard had turned the world into an endless white void. Rose wrapped her father's old coat tighter around her thin frame, knowing it would not be enough, but having no other choice. The last log had burned down to embers an hour ago, and the cold was creeping through the walls like an invisible predator. Her father, Samuel, had died 6 weeks earlier from pneumonia, leaving her alone in this harsh mountain country. At 19 years old, Rose had nowhere else to go and no family to turn to. Her mother had passed when she was just a child, and her father had been a solitary man who preferred the company of pine trees to people. He had taught her to hunt, to trap, to survive in these mountains, but he had not taught her how to face a winter like this one alone. Rose pulled on her worn gloves and stepped out into the howling wind. The cold hit her like a physical blow, stealing the breath from her lungs. Snow swirled in thick curtains, making it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. She knew there was a stand of dead pines about 100 yards to the east, trees that had been struck by lightning last summer. Their dried wood would burn hot and long if she could just reach them. She pushed forward, each step a battle against the wind and the snowdrifts that reached past her knees. Her fingers were already going numb inside the thin gloves, and ice crystals formed on her eyelashes, making it even harder to see. The cold bit through her boots, through her dress, through every layer she wore until it felt like her very bones were freezing. The stand of dead pines appeared through the white curtain like ghosts. Rose fell to her knees beside the nearest one, fumbling with her father's old hatchet. She began breaking off the smaller branches, her movements clumsy and slow. Each piece of kindling she gathered felt like a victory, a few more minutes of warmth, a few more hours of life. Time lost all meaning in the storm. Rose did not know if she had been out there for 10 minutes or an hour. Her bundle of kindling grew slowly, painfully. Her hands had stopped hurting, which she knew was a bad sign. Everything felt distant now, like she was watching herself from far away. The wind seemed to be calling to her, inviting her to just lie down in the soft snow and rest. She tried to stand, tried to head back toward the cabin, but her legs would not cooperate. The world tilted sideways, and she found herself on her hands and knees in the snow. The kindling she had gathered scattered around her. Rose tried to collect it again, but her fingers would not work properly. They were white and stiff, like pieces of wood themselves. Through the howling wind, she thought she heard a different sound. A deep voice, rough and urgent, but that was impossible. No one came out this far, especially not in weather like this. She was hallucinating, her mind playing tricks as the cold consumed her. Strong hands gripped her shoulders, lifting her as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. Rose tried to speak, to protest, but her jaw was locked from the cold. She could barely keep her eyes open, but she caught a glimpse of the man who held her. He was massive, broad-shouldered and thick with muscle, with dark hair that fell past his collar and a beard covered in ice. His eyes were a startling blue-green, like the mountain lakes in summer. "Got you," he said, his voice a deep rumble that she felt more than heard through the wind. "Stay with me now." Vincent Wright had been tracking an elk when the storm hit. He had lived in these mountains for 8 years, ever since he left his family's farm in Missouri at the age of 18. Now 26, he knew these peaks and valleys better than most men knew their own towns. He had a cabin 5 miles north, well stocked and secure, built with his own hands from timber he had cut himself. He had been heading back to it when he spotted the tracks. Human tracks, small ones, heading away from what he knew was old Sam Fairchild's place. Vincent had met Sam a handful of times over the years, trading furs and news when their paths crossed. Sam had mentioned a daughter once or twice, but Vincent had never seen her. He had assumed she lived back east somewhere, with proper family. Seeing those tracks heading out into the storm had sent alarm racing through him. No one survived long in weather like this, not unless they knew exactly what they were doing and where they were going. Those tracks had wandered, circled back, shown the confusion of someone already succumbing to the cold. Now he had her in his arms, this slip of a woman who weighed barely anything, and he could feel how cold she was even through his heavy coat. Her lips were blue, her skin pale as the snow around them. He needed to get her warm and fast, or she would not make it through the hour. Vincent's cabin was too far. She would not survive the journey. But he remembered Sam's place was close, maybe a quarter-mile back following her tracks. He adjusted his grip on her, holding her against his chest to share what warmth he could, and pushed through the storm. The cabin appeared like a miracle through the white curtain. Vincent kicked the door open and carried Rose inside. It was barely warmer than outside, the fire completely dead, but at least they were out of the wind. He laid her down on the narrow bed in the corner and immediately set to work building a fire. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, arranging kindling and logs from his own pack. He always carried emergency supplies when he traveled in winter, lessons learned from too many close calls in his early years on the mountain. Within minutes, flames were crackling in the fireplace, beginning to push back the cold, but Rose was in bad shape. Her breathing was shallow, her skin dangerously cold to the touch. Vincent knew what needed to be done, though propriety would call it scandalous. In the wilderness, propriety got people killed. He removed her wet outer clothes, then wrapped her in every blanket and fur he could find in the cabin. It was not enough. She was shivering violently now, which was actually a good sign, meaning her body was still fighting, but she needed more warmth than blankets could provide. Vincent stripped off his own wet coat and boots, then climbed into the bed beside her, pulling her against his body and wrapping them both in the layers of blankets and furs. She was like ice against him, stealing the warmth from his skin, but he held her close, rubbing her arms and back to encourage circulation. "Come on," he murmured. "Come back. You are safe now." Her shivering intensified, which he took as a good sign. Color was slowly returning to her face, though it was splotchy and uneven. Her fingers and toes would be another concern once she was stable. Frostbite could mean losing digits, or worse. Time passed in a blur of stoking the fire and holding this stranger against him. Vincent found himself studying her face in the firelight. She was younger than he had expected, probably only about 20. Her hair was a rich brown, almost auburn where the firelight caught it, and though her face was thin from what looked like recent hardship, there was a strength in the set of her jaw, the straight line of her nose. Rose's eyes fluttered open slowly. For a moment, she seemed confused, disoriented. Then awareness flooded back and she tensed in his arms. "Easy," Vincent said quietly. "You are safe. I found you in the storm. You were freezing." She tried to speak, but her voice came out as a croak. Vincent reached for a canteen of water he had set by the fire to warm and helped her take a few sips. "Who are you?" she managed finally. "Vincent Wright. I have a cabin north of here. I was heading home when I saw your tracks." "My father's cabin," Rose said, her mind still working slowly through the fog. "This is my home." "Sam's daughter," Vincent said, understanding dawning. "He told me about you, said you lived back east." "He wanted me to," Rose said, her voice gaining strength. "But I came back 2 years ago. Could not stand the city, and then he got sick and—" Her voice broke. "I am sorry," Vincent said, and he meant it. He had, like Sam, respected the old man's knowledge of these mountains. Rose suddenly became aware of how close they were, of the fact that she was in a state of undress beneath the blankets, pressed against a strange man's body. Heat that had nothing to do with the cold flooded her cheeks. "I know this is not proper," Vincent said, reading her thoughts. "But you would have died otherwise. Your body temperature was too low for blankets alone." Rose knew he was right. She had spent enough time in the wilderness to understand the dangers of severe cold. Still, she felt vulnerable in a way that frightened her almost as much as the storm had. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for saving my life." "Can you feel your fingers and toes?" Vincent asked, his tone matter-of-fact and clinical now. Rose concentrated. "My fingers hurt. My toes too. Good, pain is good, means there is still circulation." He carefully extracted himself from the blankets and added more wood to the fire. "I am going to check them, make sure there is no serious damage." He examined her hands first, his own calloused fingers surprisingly gentle as he turned them in the firelight. Her fingertips were red and swollen, but the color was good. No blackening, no signs of deep tissue damage. "They will be painful for a few days, but you will keep them," he said. Her feet were in worse shape, the toes on her left foot showing white patches that worried him. He wrapped them carefully in strips of cloth he tore from a spare shirt in his pack, then elevated them slightly on a rolled fur. "We need to watch that left foot closely," Vincent said. "If it gets worse, you might lose a toe or two, but if we keep it clean and warm, you should be all right." "Thank you," Rose said again. She felt overwhelmed by everything, by the kindness of this stranger, by how close she had come to dying, by the reality of her situation. "When did you last eat?" Vincent asked. Rose had to think about it. "Yesterday morning, I think, maybe the day before." Vincent's jaw tightened. "Why?" "I ran out of supplies 3 days ago. I was going to try to hunt when the storm passed, but it just kept getting worse." He did not say anything, just went to his pack and pulled out dried meat, hardtack, and a small bag of precious coffee. He set about making a proper meal, heating water over the fire and creating a simple stew from the jerky and some wild onions and carrots he had in his pack. The smell made Rose's stomach clench with hunger. When Vincent handed her a bowl, she had to force herself to eat slowly, to not make herself sick. They ate in silence, the storm still howling outside. Vincent studied the cabin with a critical eye. It was well built, Sam's work evident in the tight joints and solid construction, but it was small, barely large enough for one person, and the supplies were dangerously low. A few cans of beans, some flour that looked suspect, nothing that would get a person through the rest of winter. "You cannot stay here alone," Vincent said finally. Rose's chin came up, that stubborn strength showing through. "I have nowhere else to go." "You will die here," Vincent said bluntly. "You do not have enough supplies, and from the look of things, you do not have the means to get more." "How were you planning to survive until spring?" "I would have figured something out," Rose said, but even she could hear how hollow the words sounded. "Your father would not want this for you," Vincent said more gently. "He would want you safe." Tears pricked at Rose's eyes. She blinked them back angrily. She had cried enough over the past weeks, cried herself dry over her father's grave. "What do you suggest?" "I have no money, no family. This cabin is all I have." Vincent was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. He was not a man given to impulsive decisions, but something about this woman called to him. Maybe it was the strength he saw in her despite everything, or maybe it was the loneliness he recognized, the same loneliness that had been his companion for 8 years in these mountains. "Come stay at my cabin," he said finally. "Until the spring thaw at least. I have supplies enough for 2. You can help with the work, the cooking and mending. It would be a fair trade." Rose stared at him. "I could not. It would not be proper, a man and woman living together unwed." "There is no one out here to care about proper," Vincent said. "And you being dead is a lot less proper than sharing a cabin for a few months. When spring comes, if you want to come back here, I will help you restock, help you prepare properly. Or I can take you to Lincoln, help you find a place there. But you cannot stay here alone, not now, not like this." Rose wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could manage on her own, but the words would not come, because he was right. She had been fooling herself, trying to be strong, trying to prove she could survive the way her father had taught her. But she had been failing, slowly starving and freezing, too proud to admit she needed help until it was almost too late. "I will earn my keep," she said finally. "I am not looking for charity." "I know," Vincent said. "I can see that." The storm continued for 2 more days. Vincent stayed at Sam's cabin, sharing his supplies and keeping the fire burning strong. He slept on the floor wrapped in his own bedroll, giving Rose the bed. Though the cabin was so small they were never more than a few feet apart. Rose found herself watching him when she thought he was not looking. He moved with a quiet confidence that spoke of years living alone in the wilderness. His hands were never idle, always working on something, sharpening his knife, checking his traps, mending a tear in his pack. There was a strength to him that went beyond the obvious physical power in his broad shoulders and muscled arms. It was a deep, quiet strength that made her feel safe for the first time since her father had died. Vincent was equally aware of her. He caught himself noticing little things, the way she unconsciously hummed while she worked, the stubborn set of her mouth when she was trying not to show pain from her injured foot, the intelligence in her dark eyes as she watched the storm through the small window. On the 3rd day, the wind finally died down and the snow stopped falling. The world outside was transformed, covered in drifts that reached the cabin's roof in places, but the sun broke through the clouds, turning everything into a blinding white landscape. "We should go today," Vincent said. "Before another storm hits." Rose nodded. Her foot was better, the white patches fading to red, though it was still tender. She wrapped it carefully and pulled on her boots, gritting her teeth against the discomfort. Vincent had already packed what little of value the cabin held, some tools, her father's rifle, a few personal items that Rose wanted to keep. They loaded it onto a makeshift sled Vincent had fashioned from some of Sam's old lumber. Before they left, Rose stood in the doorway for a long moment, looking back at the cabin. This had been her home, her father's dream. Leaving it felt like abandoning him, like admitting defeat. "We can lock it up tight," Vincent said quietly. "It will be here in the spring if you want to come back." Rose nodded, not trusting her voice. She pulled the door closed and helped Vincent secure it. The journey to Vincent's cabin was brutal. The snow was deep and the cold was biting, though thankfully there was no wind. Vincent broke trail, his powerful legs driving through the drifts, pulling the sled behind him. He offered to carry Rose when her foot started troubling her, but she stubbornly refused, determined to make it on her own strength. It took them the better part of the day to cover 5 miles. By the time Vincent's cabin came into view, the sun was setting and Rose was limping badly, though she had not complained once. The cabin was larger than her father's, solidly built from logs that Vincent had cut and hauled himself. Smoke rose from the chimney, which surprised Rose until she saw the large dog that came bounding through the snow toward them. "That is Bear," Vincent said, a rare smile crossing his face as he greeted the animal. "He looks fierce, but he is gentle as a lamb." Bear was a massive creature, part wolf by the look of him, with thick gray fur and intelligent amber eyes. He circled Vincent excitedly, then approached Rose more cautiously, sniffing her offered hand before deciding she was acceptable and giving her the same enthusiastic greeting. Inside, the cabin was warm and surprisingly comfortable. Vincent had built it with care, with a large stone fireplace, a proper sleeping loft, and windows that let in good light. There were shelves lined with books, traps, and tools hung neatly on the walls, and a sense of order that spoke of a man who took pride in his space. "I left a fire banked before I left," Vincent explained. "Bear usually stays inside when it is cold, keeps the place from freezing." Rose looked around, taking it all in. It was more than she had expected, more of a real home than a simple survival shelter. "You built all this yourself, over the years," Vincent said. "Started with just one room, added on as I could." He showed her where things were. The root cellar dug into the hillside behind the cabin where he kept vegetables and preserved meat. The small barn where he kept his trapping supplies and could shelter animals if needed. The creek nearby where he got water in the summer. "The loft is yours," Vincent said when they came back inside. "I will sleep down here. There is a curtain you can draw for privacy." "I cannot take your bed," Rose protested. "You can and you will," Vincent said firmly. "You are still recovering and that foot needs rest. Besides, I am used to sleeping anywhere. Spent plenty of nights on the ground." Rose was too tired to argue. Her foot was throbbing and her whole body ached from the journey. She climbed the ladder to the loft and found a comfortable bed with thick quilts and furs, a small shelf for personal items, and a window that looked out over the snowy valley. That night, after a meal of venison stew and fresh bread that Vincent had baked the day before they left, Rose lay in the loft and listened to the sounds of the cabin settling, the crackle of the fire, Vincent's deep breathing, and the occasional woof from Bear. For the first time in weeks, she felt warm and safe and fed. She did not let herself think too hard about what it meant to be here, alone in the wilderness with a man she barely knew. She just let herself rest. The days fell into a rhythm. Rose's foot healed slowly, and as it did, she took on more of the household work. She cooked and cleaned, mended Vincent's clothes and her own, organized his somewhat haphazard supplies into a more sensible system. She found she liked keeping house, liked the simple satisfaction of making the cabin more comfortable. Vincent spent his days checking his trap lines, hunting, cutting wood for the fire. He would leave before dawn and return in the afternoon, always with something to show for his efforts. Rose learned that he sold his furs to a trading post in Lincoln every spring, that this was how he made his living, how he survived out here. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and talk. Rose learned that Vincent had grown up on a farm in Missouri, the youngest of 6 children. His father had been a hard man, quick with his fists and his judgment. Vincent had left as soon as he was old enough, heading west to make his own way. He had worked as a ranch hand for a few years before discovering he preferred the solitude of the mountains. Vincent learned that Rose had been sent to live with an aunt in Philadelphia after her mother died, that she had spent 10 miserable years there being trained to be a proper lady, learning to pour tea and make polite conversation, and all the things she had no interest in. She had returned to Wyoming as soon as she turned 17, despite her aunt's protests, and had spent 2 happy years with her father before the pneumonia took him. "You miss it?" Vincent asked one night. "The city, the society, not even a little bit," Rose said. "I hated every moment of it. All those rules about what you could say and wear and do. Out here, you can just be yourself. Out here, you can die if you make a mistake," Vincent pointed out. "I would rather die free than live in a cage," Rose said fiercely. Vincent studied her in the firelight, this small, fierce woman who had nearly frozen to death rather than compromise who she was. "I understand that," he said quietly. As January turned to February, something shifted between them. The easy companionship deepened into something more. Rose found herself watching Vincent more often, noticing the way his muscles moved under his shirt when he worked, the rare smile that transformed his usually serious face, the gentleness in his hands when he checked her healing foot or scratched bare behind the ears. Vincent was equally aware of Rose. He noticed how she sang softly while she cooked, old songs her mother had taught her. He noticed how she had started to put small touches on the cabin, wildflowers preserved from summer in a jar on the shelf, his books organized and dusted, his clothes mended with tiny, careful stitches. The cabin had been a place to survive. Now it was starting to feel like a home. One night in late February, a particularly fierce storm blew in. The wind howled around the cabin, finding every tiny crack and gap. Even with the fire roaring, the cold seeped in. Rose came down from the loft, wrapped in a quilt, unable to sleep in the drafty space. "Too cold up there," she admitted. Vincent was already wrapped in his bedroll by the fire. "Sleep down here tonight," he said, moving over to make room, closer to the fire. Rose hesitated only a moment before settling down beside him. They lay back to back at first, trying to maintain some propriety, but the cold eventually pushed them closer. Vincent rolled over, and Rose found herself pulled back against his chest, his arm coming around her to share warmth. It felt right in a way that frightened her. She could feel his heartbeat against her back, strong and steady. His breath stirred her hair. She knew she should pull away, should maintain some distance, but she could not make herself move. "Rose," Vincent said quietly, and there was something in his voice that made her heart speed up. "Yes." "I need to tell you something." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "These past weeks, having you here, it has been good, better than good. I have been alone for a long time, and I thought I preferred it that way. But now I cannot imagine this cabin without you in it. Cannot imagine my days without looking forward to coming home and seeing you here." Rose's breath caught. "Vincent, I know I am not a good prospect," he continued. "I live in the wilderness. I have no real prospects beyond selling furs. But I am a hard worker, and I would take care of you, and I would never raise a hand to you or speak a harsh word. And I think, maybe, you might feel something for me too." Rose rolled over to face him. In the firelight, his eyes were impossibly blue, looking at her with an intensity that made her feel like she might burst into flame. "I do," she whispered. "I did not want to. I did not want to need anyone or depend on anyone, but you have been so kind to me, so patient. You saved my life, and you have given me a place when I had nowhere to go. And somewhere along the way I started to care for you, more than care for you." Vincent reached up and cupped her face with his rough hand. "Can I kiss you?" Rose answered by closing the distance between them. The kiss was tentative at first, both of them new to this, but it quickly deepened. Rose felt something unlock inside her chest, something she had been holding tight and closed since her father died. Vincent's arms came around her, pulling her closer, and she went willingly, wanting to be as close as possible. They broke apart, both breathing hard. Vincent rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it is fast, and I know we have not known each other long. But out here, time moves different. I know what I feel, and I know what I want. I want you to stay, not just for the winter, but forever. I want you to be my wife." Rose felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears this time, happy tears. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." They kissed again, longer this time, learning the shape and taste of each other. When they finally settled down to sleep, Rose was tucked securely against Vincent's chest, his arms around her, and for the first time since her father had died, she felt like she had come home. The next morning they woke tangled together, The fire burned down to embers, but both of them warm in each other's arms. Vincent brushed Rose's hair back from her face and kissed her forehead. "We will go to Lincoln as soon as the weather clears," he said. "Find a preacher. Do this properly." "I do not need properly," Rose said. "I just need you." "You will have both," Vincent promised. The trip to Lincoln had to wait for warmer weather. March brought the first hints of spring, the snow beginning to melt, the days growing longer. Vincent used the time to prepare, trading some of his stored furs to a passing trapper for a gold ring he had been carrying, meant for his wife someday. When he showed it to Rose, her hands shook as she took it. It was simple, just a plain band, but to her it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "It is perfect," she whispered. They made the journey to Lincoln on a clear day in late March. The town was small but growing, full of miners and ranchers and people trying to make their fortune in the West. The wooden buildings were rough but sturdy, and there was a church at the center of town with a proper steeple. The preacher was a thin man named Reverend Michaels who looked at them with kind but questioning eyes. "You are both certain about this?" "More certain than I have been about anything in my life," Vincent said, his hand tight around Rose's. "I am," Rose added. "He saved my life and I love him." "That is all that matters." Reverend Michaels smiled. "Then who am I to stand in the way of that?" The ceremony was simple, just the three of them in the small church. Rose wore her cleanest dress and had braided her hair with some early wildflowers Vincent had found for her. Vincent wore his best shirt and had trimmed his beard. When he slipped the ring onto her finger and spoke his vows, his voice was rough with emotion. Rose's voice was steady when she spoke hers, looking up into his eyes and meaning every word. "I promise to stand by you, to work beside you, to love you all my days." When Reverend Michaels pronounced them husband and wife, Vincent kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart ache in the best way possible. They spent that night at a small boarding house in town, their first night as husband and wife. Vincent was gentle and patient, and Rose felt herself fall even more in love with this quiet, strong man who had given her a second chance at life. In the morning, they bought supplies with the money from Vincent's furs. Flour and sugar and coffee, fabric for new clothes, a few precious books Rose had been admiring in the general store. The shopkeeper, a friendly woman named Mrs. Chen, congratulated them on their marriage and threw in some extra ribbon as a gift. The journey back to the cabin felt different now. They were returning home together as husband and wife. Rose rode behind Vincent on the horse they had bought with some of the fur money, her arms wrapped around his waist, her cheek resting against his broad back. Spring came fully to the mountains in April. The snow melted away, revealing the brown earth beneath. Green shoots began to push up through the soil. The creek behind the cabin swelled with runoff, the water clear and cold and singing over the rocks. Rose planted a garden in a sunny spot near the cabin, seeds she had bought in Lincoln carefully tucked into the earth. Vincent built her a fence to keep the deer and rabbits out, working with the same patient care he brought to everything he did. They fell into a new rhythm as husband and wife. Vincent still checked his traps and hunted, but now he came home to a true partner, someone who understood the work and shared in it. Rose still cooked and cleaned, but she also helped skin the animals Vincent brought home, helped cure the furs, helped with all the hard work of surviving in the wilderness. But it was more than survival now. They were building a life together, building something that mattered. In the evenings, they would sit together on the small porch Vincent built, watching the sun set over the mountains, bare at their feet. Vincent would have his arm around Rose's shoulders and she would lean into him, perfectly content. "You ever miss Philadelphia?" Vincent asked one evening. Rose laughed. Not even once. This is where I am meant to be, with you. I never thought I would marry, Vincent admitted. Never thought I would want to share my life with someone, but you changed everything. You saved me, Rose said. In every way a person can be saved. Summer came, warm and bright. Rose's garden flourished, providing fresh vegetables to supplement the meat Vincent provided. They explored the mountains together, Vincent showing Rose the secret places he had discovered over his years alone. Hidden meadows full of wildflowers, clear pools perfect for bathing, vistas where you could see for miles in every direction. One hot afternoon in July, they swam in one of those pools, the cold water a relief from the summer heat. Rose floated on her back, looking up at the blue sky through the green canopy of pines, and thought that she had never been happier. Vincent swam up beside her, water droplets gleaming on his tanned skin. I have something to tell you, Rose said. He looked at her, waiting. I am fairly certain I am with child, she said, a smile spreading across her face. Vincent's eyes went wide. Then he let out a whoop of joy that echoed off the rocks, scooped Rose up despite her laughing protests, and spun her around in the water. Are you happy? Rose asked, suddenly nervous. Happy does not even begin to cover it, Vincent said. He set her down carefully, his hands gentle on her waist. A child, our child. Rose, you have given me everything. We have given each other everything, Rose corrected. As summer faded into fall, Rose's belly began to swell with the growing baby. Vincent became even more protective, insisting she rest more, taking on extra work so she would not have to strain herself. Rose found it both endearing and frustrating. I am pregnant, not broken, she told him one afternoon when he tried to take a water bucket from her hands. I know, Vincent said, but you are carrying our child. Let me take care of you, please. Rose softened at the plea in his voice. All right. But you have to let me do some things, or I will go mad with boredom. They compromised. Rose did the lighter work, cooking and mending and tending her garden. Vincent did the heavy lifting and the hunting. Together, they prepared for the baby, Vincent building a cradle from smooth pine, Rose sewing tiny clothes from soft fabric. Winter came again, but this time Rose was safe and warm and well-fed, no longer alone and struggling to survive. The cabin that had once been Vincent's solitary refuge was now filled with life and love, and the anticipation of new life to come. In late February, with snow falling softly outside and the fire burning warm inside, Rose went into labor. Vincent had ridden to Lincoln a month earlier to fetch Mrs. Chen, the shopkeeper who also served as the town's midwife. She had agreed to stay with them for the last month of Rose's pregnancy, sleeping in a small addition Vincent had built onto the cabin. Mrs. Chen proved her worth that long night, guiding Rose through the labor with calm competence while Vincent paced and worried and got in the way. Mr. Wright, you are no help at all, Mrs. Chen finally told him. Go outside, chop some wood, do something useful. Vincent reluctantly obeyed, though he did not go far, and he came running the moment he heard the baby's first cry. It was a boy, small but healthy, with a shock of dark hair and lungs that could wake the dead. Rose was exhausted but radiant as she held him, tears streaming down her face. A son, she whispered. Vincent, we have a son. Vincent knelt beside the bed, staring at the tiny person in awe. When Rose placed the baby in his large, rough hands, he held the child as carefully as if he were made of glass. He is perfect, Vincent said, his voice rough with emotion. You are perfect. Thank you, Rose. Thank you for giving me this, for giving me a family. They named him Samuel after Rose's father. Samuel Wright, born in a cabin in the Wyoming mountains, the first of what would become a large and boisterous family, Mrs. Chen stayed another 2 weeks to help Rose recover and to teach her about caring for a newborn. When she finally left to return to Lincoln, she hugged Rose tight. "You have a good man there," she said, "and a beautiful family. Be happy." "I am," Rose said, "happier than I ever thought possible." Life with a baby was harder than Rose had anticipated. Samuel was a fussy child who did not sleep well, and there were nights when Rose thought she might collapse from exhaustion. But Vincent was always there, walking the floor with his son in his arms when Rose needed to rest, changing soiled cloths without complaint, doing whatever needed to be done. Spring came again, and Rose marveled at how much her life had changed in just over a year. From nearly freezing to death alone, to married with a child, living in a cabin in the mountains with a man she loved more than she had thought possible. They fell into a new routine, one that accommodated Samuel's needs. Rose learned to cook while wearing the baby in a sling, learned to work one-handed while holding her son. Vincent learned to set his traps more quickly so he could get home sooner, learned to move quietly when the baby was finally sleeping. Samuel grew from a tiny, fragile infant into a sturdy, curious baby. He had his mother's dark eyes and his father's strong features. By the time he was 6 months old, he was crawling everywhere, getting into everything, keeping both his parents on their toes. "He is going to be a handful," Rose said one evening, watching Samuel pull himself up on the furniture with determination. "He takes after his mother," Vincent said with a smile, earning him a playful swat from Rose. As Samuel grew into a toddler, Rose became pregnant again. This time it was a girl, born in the spring when the wildflowers were blooming. They named her Emily, and she was easier than Samuel had been, a calm, content baby who slept through the night from the start. The cabin that Vincent had built for one now held 4, and it rang with the sounds of children playing, of laughter and occasional tears, of life being lived fully. Vincent built another addition, giving the children their own room, giving the family more space to grow. Years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growth. 2 more children came, another boy they named Daniel, and finally another girl they called Margaret. The cabin expanded with each addition, Vincent always building, always improving, creating a real homestead in the wilderness. Samuel grew into a strong boy who followed his father everywhere, learning to trap and hunt and survive in the mountains. Emily was quiet but clever, always watching and learning. Daniel was the adventurous one, constantly wandering off and having to be retrieved, and Margaret was the baby, doted on by everyone. Rose sometimes thought back to that day in the blizzard, when she had been gathering kindling and thinking she might die alone in the cold. It seemed like another lifetime, another person entirely. That frightened, grieving girl had become a woman, a wife, a mother. She had found strength she had not known she possessed, had built a life that was harder but infinitely more rewarding than anything she could have imagined in Philadelphia. Vincent, too, had changed. The solitary mountain man had become a husband and father, his rough edges softened by love but his core strength unchanged. He was a good father, patient and kind but firm when needed. He taught his sons to respect the wilderness, to take only what they needed and to give back when they could. He taught his daughters that they were just as capable as any boy, that strength came in many forms. On warm summer evenings, when the children were finally asleep, Vincent and Rose would sit together on the porch they had expanded over the years. Sometimes they would talk, sharing the events of the day or making plans for the future. Sometimes they would just sit in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the stars come out over the mountains. "You ever regret it?" Rose asked one such evening. She was in her 30s now, her body showing the marks of bearing 4 children, her hands rough from work. Giving up your solitary life for all of this chaos. Vincent pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. Not once, not for a single moment. Before you I was surviving, now I am living. There is a difference. I love you, Rose said. I do not say it enough, but I do with everything I am. I know, Vincent said. And I love you. You were freezing in a blizzard and I found you, but the truth is you saved me just as much as I saved you. Maybe more. They sat together as the night deepened. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life and a family in the harsh beauty of the Wyoming mountains. Behind them, the cabin was warm and bright, full of the children who were their legacy, the proof of the love that had grown from a chance meeting in a snowstorm. Inside, Samuel stirred in his sleep, dreaming of the trap lines he would check with his father tomorrow. Emily shifted, her arm flung over her sister Margaret, protective even in sleep. Daniel rolled over, kicking off his blankets as usual. The house breathed with the rhythm of the family sleeping within it. Bear, now old and gray-muzzled, lay by the fire, his job of protecting this family nearly done. He had been there from the beginning, had welcomed Rose when she first arrived, had patiently endured the pulling hands of children learning to be gentle. He was part of the family too, as much as any of them. As the years continued to pass, the Wright family became well known in Lincoln. Vincent's furs were considered the finest in the territory, and Rose's garden produced enough vegetables that she could trade the surplus for other goods. They made the trip to town several times a year, the children growing more excited with each visit, treating it as a grand adventure. Samuel, as he grew into his teenage years, began to chafe at the isolation of mountain life. He wanted to see more of the world, wanted to know what lay beyond the peaks that had bounded his entire existence. Vincent understood, had felt the same restless energy at that age. He did not try to hold his son back, but he did make him promise to learn everything he needed to survive first. The world can be cruel, Vincent told Samuel one day as they checked the trap lines. The boy was 14 now, nearly as tall as his father and strong from years of mountain living. You need to be ready for it. I know, Pa, Samuel said, but I want to see it anyway. I want to know what is out there. I understand, Vincent said. Just promise me you will be careful and promise you will come back. I will, Samuel said. This will always be home. Emily, on the other hand, loved the mountains as much as her parents did. She had her mother's practical nature and her father's quiet strength. By the time she was 12, she could shoot as well as any of them, could track game through the forest, could survive alone for days if needed. But she also had a gentleness about her, a way with injured animals that was almost magical. Daniel lived up to his adventurous nature, constantly getting into scrapes and narrow escapes. He fell out of trees, got chased by a bear once, nearly drowned in the creek. Vincent and Rose alternated between exasperation and terror, but they could not help but admire his fearless spirit. Margaret, the youngest, was the one who most loved the social aspect of their trips to town. She would talk to everyone, make friends with every child she met, charm the shopkeepers into giving her extra peppermint sticks. Rose saw something of herself in Margaret, or perhaps what she might have been if she had not hated Philadelphia so much. A bridge between the wilderness and civilization. When Samuel finally left at 17 to see more of the world, it was a bittersweet day. Rose cried, though she tried to hide it, and Vincent gripped his son's shoulder hard, conveying everything he could not say in words. Be safe, Vincent said. Be smart, and come home when you are ready. Samuel hugged his mother, shook his father's hand, ruffled his siblings' hair, and rode off toward Lincoln and whatever lay beyond. They stood watching until he was out of sight, a family suddenly feeling the first real absence in their tight-knit circle. But Samuel kept his promise. He returned 2 years later, full of stories about the places he had been and the things he had seen. He had worked on a ranch in Montana, had tried his hand at mining in Colorado, had even spent some time in Denver experiencing city life. But in the end, he came home to the mountains, bringing with him a young woman named Catherine who had stolen his heart. The cabin was extended once more to accommodate the young couple. Catherine adapted to mountain life with surprising ease, reminding Rose of her own arrival all those years ago. Another wedding was held in the little church in Lincoln, and Rose cried again, this time happy tears for her son finding the same kind of love she had found. Emily met a young trapper named James when she was 18 during one of their trips to Lincoln. He was quiet and respectful, and more importantly, he understood and respected her love for the mountains. Their courtship was slow and careful, two people making sure they were right for each other before committing. When they married 2 years later, James moved his own trap lines closer to the Wright homestead, building a small cabin of his own nearby but remaining part of the extended family. Daniel, true to form, fell in love with a girl in Lincoln, a minister's daughter named Sarah who was as proper and civilized as Daniel was wild. Somehow, impossibly, it worked. Sarah tamed some of Daniel's recklessness without crushing his spirit, and Daniel brought joy and laughter to Sarah's too serious life. They married and settled in Lincoln, where Daniel found work as a guide for people wanting to explore the mountains, his knowledge and fearlessness finally put to good use. Margaret, the youngest, took the longest to settle down. She loved her independence, loved the freedom of the mountains but also the society of the town. She worked for a while at Mrs. Chen's store, learning the business, before she met a young man named Robert who owned a ranch near Lincoln. They married when Margaret was 23, and she split her time between the ranch and visits back to the homestead, bringing the best of both worlds together. Vincent and Rose aged gracefully, their love deepening with each passing year. Vincent's dark hair turned silver, his shoulders remained broad but his movements slowed just slightly. Rose's face gained lines around her eyes and mouth, badges of a life spent laughing and smiling and living fully. They were in their 50s now, and their children were all grown with families of their own, but they remained at the heart of the family, the anchor that held everyone together. Grandchildren came, a whole new generation to fill the expanding homestead with noise and laughter. Samuel and Catherine had 3 children. Emily and James had 4, Daniel and Sarah had 2, and Margaret and Robert had 5. The family gatherings at Christmas and during the summers became major events, with people everywhere, children running wild, the smell of cooking filling the air. On one such gathering, during a particularly beautiful summer evening, the whole family was assembled. 3 generations of Wrights spread out across the homestead, children playing, adults talking, the sun setting in glorious color over the mountains. Vincent stood on the porch of the main cabin, the one he had built all those years ago for just himself, and looked out at all of it. His children, grown and strong and happy. Their spouses, good people who had become part of the family. His grandchildren, loud and energetic and full of life. And at the center of it all, Rose, laughing at something Margaret was saying, her face alight with joy. She caught him looking and made her way over, slipping her hand into his the way she had done 1,000 times before. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "About a blizzard," Vincent said. "About a foolish young woman gathering kindling in a storm. About how I almost did not go that way that day, almost took a different path. About how different my life would be if I had." Rose leaned her head against his shoulder. "I was not foolish. I was desperate. There is a difference." "You were brave," Vincent corrected. "You have always been brave, strong and stubborn and brave." "I was freezing to death," Rose pointed out. "You saved me." "We saved each other," Vincent said, echoing words from long ago. "That is the truth of it." They stood together, watching their family, the life they had built through hard work and love and determination. The mountains rose around them, permanent and enduring, the same peaks that had witnessed their meeting, their struggles, their triumphs. "I would do it all again," Rose said quietly. "Every hard moment, every struggle, every fear. I would do it all again to end up right here with you with all of this." "Me too," Vincent said. He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "From that first moment when I found you in the snow, I knew you were special. I did not know how special, did not know you would change everything, but I knew." "We have had a good life," Rose said. "The best," Vincent agreed. "And it is not over yet. We have more years ahead of us, more grandchildren to meet, more sunsets to watch together." As the evening deepened, and the family slowly made their way inside for dinner, Vincent and Rose remained on the porch for a few more moments, reluctant to leave the peace of the evening. The mountains stood silent around them, witness to the love story that had begun in a blizzard and grown into something remarkable. Inside the cabin, the family gathered around the large table that Vincent had built specifically to accommodate everyone. Children squeezed onto benches. Adults filled every chair, and the noise was tremendous. Grace was said, and then food was passed, stories were told, jokes were made, and laughter filled every corner of the home. Vincent looked down the length of the table to where Rose sat at the other end, surrounded by their grandchildren clamoring for her attention. She met his eyes across the crowd, and the look they exchanged said everything that words could not. Love, gratitude, contentment, joy. A life well lived together. Later that night, after everyone had finally settled down to sleep, children tucked into every available space in the extended cabin, Vincent and Rose lay in their bed, the same bed they had shared for more than 3 decades. Rose curled into Vincent's side, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "You remember the first night I spent here?" Rose asked. "How you slept on the floor and gave me the loft?" "I remember," Vincent said, his hand stroking her hair. "I remember thinking you were the most stubborn woman I had ever met, refusing help even when you clearly needed it." "I had to prove I could manage," Rose said. "I did not want to be a burden." "You were never a burden," Vincent said firmly. "You were a gift, the greatest gift I ever received." Rose lifted her head to look at him. Even in the darkness she could make out his features, so familiar and so dear. "I love you, Vincent Wright. Thank you for finding me in that blizzard. Thank you for bringing me home." "Thank you for staying," Vincent said. "Thank you for choosing me, choosing this life, even when it was hard." They kissed, a soft, sweet kiss that held decades of love and partnership and commitment. When they settled down to sleep, wrapped in each other's arms, they were both smiling. The years continued their steady march. Vincent and Rose aged further, their steps slower but their spirits undiminished. They remained at the homestead, though their children tried several times to convince them to move closer to Lincoln, to someplace easier with more help nearby. "This is our home," Vincent always said. "We will leave when we cannot stay any longer, and not a moment before." Rose always backed him up. "The mountains are in our blood now. We belong here." They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. It was a major event, people coming from all over to honor the couple who had become something of a legend in the area. The story of how they met, of Vincent finding Rose in the blizzard, had been told and retold until it took on an almost mythical quality. But for Vincent and Rose, it was not a myth. It was their truth, the foundation of everything they had built together. Vincent was 66 years old when he finally slowed down enough that Rose started to worry. He was still strong, still capable, but there were days when his energy flagged, when he needed to rest more than he used to. "You are getting old," Rose teased gently, though worry lurked behind her eyes. "We are getting old," Vincent corrected. He was sitting in the rocking chair he had built years ago, Bear's successor, a younger dog named Scout at his feet. Together, just like we promised. Rose, at 63, was still spry and active, though her joints ached in the cold and her hair was now completely silver. "Do you regret not having an easier life? Not moving to town where things would be more comfortable?" "Never," Vincent said immediately. "This is where we were meant to be. This is where our story started, and this is where it will end when the time comes. I have no regrets, Rose, not a single one." "Neither do I," Rose said softly. "Not one." They spent their days in a slower rhythm now, tending a smaller garden, taking gentle walks around the property, visiting with family when they came. Their children and grandchildren were attentive, making sure they had everything they needed, but respectful of their independence. Vincent died peacefully in his sleep one winter night, when he was 72 years old. Rose woke to find him still and quiet beside her, his face peaceful, his hand still holding hers. She sat with him for a long time, holding his hand and saying goodbye to the man who had saved her life and given her a reason to live it fully. The funeral was held in Lincoln, at the little church where they had married more than 4 decades earlier. It seemed like the entire territory turned out to pay their respects. Vincent Wright had been a good man, a good husband, a good father. He had lived his life with integrity and strength, and he was mourned by everyone who had known him. Rose stood at his grave, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, and felt the weight of his absence like a physical thing. But she also felt gratitude for the years they had had, for the love they had shared, for the family they had created together. She returned to the homestead after the funeral, despite her children's protests that she should come stay with one of them. "I am not ready to leave yet," she told them. "This is where I belong. This is where we built our life. I am not finished here." Samuel, now 51 and silver-haired himself, understood. "Then we will make sure you are not alone. We will take turns staying with you, keeping you company." And they did. There was always someone at the homestead, one of her children or grandchildren or even great-grandchildren staying with Rose, keeping her company, helping with the chores. The cabin was never empty, never quiet, just as it had been when her children were young. Rose lived for another 5 years after Vincent's passing. She remained sharp and clear-headed, though her body grew frailer. She spent her days telling stories to her great-grandchildren, teaching them about herbs and healing, about the history of the family and the homestead. She made sure they knew about their grandfather, about the strong, quiet mountain man who had built all of this with his own 2 hands. On a clear spring morning when the wildflowers were blooming and the mountains were showing their first green after the winter snow, Rose died peacefully in her sleep. She was 77 years old, and she had lived a life full of love and purpose and meaning. They buried her next to Vincent in the cemetery in Lincoln. The whole family gathered once more, 3 generations coming together to say goodbye to the woman who had been the heart of them all. At the funeral, Samuel stood to speak. "My mother once told me about the day my father found her in the blizzard. She said she had given up, had accepted that she was going to die alone in the cold. But then he appeared, like something out of a dream, and he carried her to warmth and safety. She said that moment changed everything, that it was the beginning of the life she was meant to live. My father saved her life that day, but she saved his too. They saved each other, and in doing so, they created all of this." He gestured to the assembled family. "Every one of us exists because of a chance meeting in a snowstorm, because of love and courage and determination. That is their legacy. That is what we carry forward. The family returned to the homestead after the funeral. It had been decided that Samuel and Catherine would move into the main cabin, would keep it maintained and cared for, would make sure it remained the heart of the family for future generations. As they walked through the door, stepping into the space that Vincent had built and Rose had made a home, Samuel felt the weight of responsibility and honor settle on his shoulders. This was more than just a building. It was the physical manifestation of his parents' love story, of their determination to build something lasting in the wilderness. He ran his hand along the mantel above the fireplace, the same fireplace where Vincent had warmed Rose back to life on that long-ago winter night. The same fireplace where their family had gathered for decades, where stories had been told and memories had been made. On the mantel was a simple wooden carving that Vincent had made years ago, during one of the long winters when outside work was impossible. It showed a man carrying a woman through the snow, her head resting against his chest, his arms strong and sure around her. He had given it to Rose on their 20th anniversary, a tribute to the beginning of their story. Samuel picked up the carving, studying the careful detail his father had put into it. This would stay here on this mantel for as long as the cabin stood. A reminder of where it all began, of the love that had built this family, of the courage it took to survive and thrive in the harsh beauty of the Wyoming mountains. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, carrying with it the promise of spring, of renewal, of life continuing in its eternal cycle. The mountains stood eternal and unchanging, witness to the small human dramas played out in their shadow. But among those small dramas, some shone brighter than others. Some left a mark that lasted beyond the individual lives involved. The story of Vincent and Rose Wright was one such story. It would be told and retold by their descendants, passed down through generations. The mountain man who found a freezing woman in a blizzard and carried her to warmth, the start of a love that created a legacy. Years would pass, decades would turn to centuries, but the cabin would remain, maintained and cherished by the Wright family. And on the mantel, the wooden carving would stay, a testament to the power of love, the importance of courage, and the beauty of two souls finding each other against all odds in the wilderness of the Wyoming territory. In the end, it was a simple story. A woman gathering kindling in a blizzard, a mountain man finding her freezing, carrying her to warmth and safety. But from that simple beginning grew something extraordinary, a love that lasted a lifetime, a family that spanned generations, a legacy that would endure as long as the mountains themselves. And perhaps, on quiet winter nights when the snow falls soft and thick over the Wyoming wilderness, if you listen closely, you can still hear the echo of that story. The crunch of boots through deep snow, the wind howling through the trees, the strong, steady heartbeat of a man carrying a woman to safety, and the soft whisper of two voices promising to love each other through all the years to come. It was a good story, a true story, a love story for the ages. And it all began on a cold winter day in 1878, when Vincent Wright followed tracks into a blizzard and found Rose Fairchild freezing in the snow, gathering kindling to fuel a dying fire. He carried her to warmth that day, but what he really did was carry her to a future neither of them could have imagined, a future full of love and family, and a life well lived together in the beautiful, harsh, unforgiving mountains they both called home.